Star Trek, also known as Star Trek 2009, because that was obviously the year it was released, was directed by J.J. Abrams, produced by Abrams and Damon Lindelof, and written by Robert Orci and Alex Kurtzman. This film was the reboot, the moment when Star Trek was forever changed into something visually and tonally unrecognizable. As Robert Meyer Burnett has previously pointed out, the writers and producers of Star Trek from 1966 to 2005 had taken great pains to ensure that Star Trek productions were all recognizably part of the same continuity. There was a brand identity that was maintained. Star Trek was, after all, one consistent chronological story, and though it was not easy to manage such a massive and long-running property, and there were some continuity issues here and there and some mistakes, but for the most part the various production teams did an excellent job knitting the various shows and films together into the same canon. But then suddenly, in 2009, there was this new movie called Star Trek, and it didn't look and feel anything like Star Trek that had gone before. This was flashy, fast-paced. The sets and ships and uniforms were radically different. Even the characters spoke with contemporary millennial dialogue. The Enterprise was different. The bridge was different. And of course, here we had new actors playing the original series characters. And that was an obvious choice given the fact that this was a prequel story about the younger years of the Enterprise crew. But still, these were all major changes because it was the first time that writers and producers of Star Trek had gone out of their way to break Star Trek continuity and rewrite history on purpose. Of course, we now know why these Kelvin timeline movies are so radically different, and there was an agreement between Paramount and J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot Productions that Bad Robot wasn't allowed to make money from merchandise made before this movie, which is to say, all of the merchandise produced from 1966 to 2005, but they could make money from new merchandise made in an entirely new Star Trek universe of their own creation. And so they built a brand new Star Trek continuity that was completely separate from the one that had existed from 1966 to 2005. That classic era was now retroactively known as the Prime Timeline, and this new Star Trek had to be different from the old one in several ways, visually and tonally. The degree to just how different this new Kelvin timeline Star Trek needed to be is a topic of much debate among fans, but suffice to say there's no mistaking one for the other. So this is going to be a bigger video than normal. I have a lot to say on Star Trek 2009 in just a moment. But first, I want to say this. Sometimes I get carried away on my computer for hours writing and editing videos like this one. I'm rendering a video and that blue progress bar can take ages. On occasion, I skip meals and binge on snacks that aren't too healthy for me. But thankfully, today's sponsor for this video, Control, is here with the answer. Control makes snacks like protein meal shakes, protein bars, and protein cookies that are ideal for assisting in weight loss and exercise training as well. Their cookies taste fantastic, they're soft-baked, come in a variety of flavors like chocolate chunk, cookies and cream, and peanut butter pieces. They're specially made to be healthier than your average cookie, and they've been reformulated to taste better and offer additional nutritional benefits. They've got 15 grams of protein, 4 grams of collagen, 4 grams of fiber, 250 calories, and 22 vitamins and minerals, and now just 1 gram of sugar. I especially appreciate their meal replacement shakes made with real cereal pieces. They're simple and quick to make. I love the blender bottle, and there's this cool wire ball. You put that into the drink, you shake it up, and it blends it for you. Very clever. And it tastes great with oat milk. The shakes are ideal as a supplement for breakfast or a quick lunch or a post-workout protein drink. So now I have no excuses anymore for binging on unhealthy snacks when I skip meals because I'm working intensely at my computer. Same goes for you gamers out there playing for hours and ordering junk food takeout to your home. Skip all that and get yourself some Control snacks instead and make the healthier and tastier choice. Control helped me snack better and more responsibly, and they want me to offer you the same opportunity by sponsoring this video and setting up this fantastic discount. Check out my link below and on screen. Use the promo code DaveCullenShow to get 10% off your order. I recommend the bundle builder for the best value and variety of products. Control can also be found at your local GNC store, so you can pick up their snacks there and give them a try. Alright, so welcome back. Star Trek 2009 is a reboot in the strictest sense, in that there is absolutely no requirement to have any prior knowledge of Star Trek before watching this. The film was designed for a general cinema-going audience, specifically fans of generic Hollywood action movies in the vein of the likes of, say, Transformers, Michael Bay films, Mission Impossible films, and people who enjoy action fantasy movies like superhero films or Indiana Jones movies or Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and sci-fi fantasy like Star Wars. Franchises that attract general audiences rather than niche science fiction audiences like Star Trek movies typically had done up until that point. Star Trek 2009 was the first Star Trek film to dispense with telling a particularly Star Trek story in a conventional Star Trek way, and instead it adopted the stereotypical action movie blockbuster template, giving audiences the kind of editing, pacing, shot composition, characterization, action beats, and witty one-liners that they had come to expect from a stock standard summer crowd pleaser. The film had the biggest budget of any Trek film at the time, and also made the most money, a budget of $150 million, making $385 million at the box office. As a result of making the film for a broad general audience, the writing is especially lacking in the intellectual and philosophical departments. The film has no depth, meaning, or substance. I know many of you like this film. It is a fairly easy enough watch, but you have to turn your brain off and just go with the flow. It's a thrill ride and nothing more. Kind of like a Fast and Furious movie. And that's fine if you like Fast and Furious and Transformers type movies, but it's not Star Trek. I'll give you numerous examples. Beginning with the villain and his ship. Nero is a Romulan mining captain. In the 24th century, Romulus is destroyed by a supernova. Terrible idea. Anyway, Ambassador Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy, one of the few redeeming aspects of the film, tries to save Romulus, but he fails. He stopped the supernova from doing more damage by injecting some substance known as red matter into it, but this created a black hole, for some reason, which was also a time vortex. It's very confusing because at the end of the movie, red matter is used again, and it creates a black hole, but this time it doesn't create a time vortex for some reason, go figure. Now Nero and his ship are pulled back in time to the 23rd century, and Nero immediately attacks a Federation ship called the USS Kelvin and demands its captain come aboard to negotiate a ceasefire. Once over there, Nero's men ask this captain about his knowledge of Ambassador Spock. He's obviously never heard of Spock. So, for no reason, Nero then runs the man through with a staff, killing him. Why? Well, clearly for shock value. You see, for some reason that makes no sense whatsoever, Nero wants revenge on the Federation and Ambassador Spock for failing to save Romulus. How is there any justification here for revenge? It's not Spock's fault that Romulus was destroyed. He failed, but his intentions were good. Nero later proceeds to capture Ambassador Spock and uses a drill and red matter to destroy the planet Vulcan in the past. For revenge. Why? Why wouldn't Nero just go straight to the Romulus of the 23rd century and warn them about the future supernova? Maybe it would give them time to avert the disaster, prevent it from happening. Spock didn't do any intentional or unintentional harm to Romulus or Romulan people. He merely failed to prevent a catastrophe. So basically, Spock fails to stop a natural disaster, an act of nature, and as a result of that, Nero decides to commit genocide. What kind of garbage writing is this? So let's just follow this logic. Imagine, heaven forfend, your child was in a burning building, and the fire was started by accident, and a firefighter went in there to try to save your child, but he failed and the child died. Would you seek revenge on the firefighter? No. Of course, no one in their right mind would think this way. It's a daft idea. Moreover, what is it with Nero's mining ship, the Narada? Okay, so apparently, and according to the Countdown comics, the ship looked nothing like this prior to receiving Borg upgrades, and then it changed radically. But that information is not actually in this film, unfortunately. You see, the production designers didn't think about the practical design aspects of such a vessel, specifically its interior. I mean, it's supposed to be a mining ship, which means its design should be entirely built around functionality, but anyway, like the entire film, this is all about superficiality and style over substance. Why aren't there any guardrails inside? The interior makes no sense. Right? You can just fall to your death off these death trap platforms that are everywhere and fall into an abyss beneath you. Now, the reason for this is simple. So that you can have more dramatic fight scenes where Kirk is hanging off a ledge. Now, you might want to get used to that because these films always seem to have characters jumping off cliffs and ledges, almost falling off, hanging onto ledges, But I will give the film some credit for one reasonably emotionally impactful moment with the opening, where George Kirk sacrifices himself and the Kelvin to save the crew of the Kelvin and his wife and newborn son Jim Kirk. But aside from that, I can't offer the film much praise. We're introduced to a young Jim Kirk when he was a boy, stealing a car and being chased by whatever this is. Is this a robot police officer or a man with a mask on? What does it say about the Federation in this particular future that law enforcement looks this dystopian and impersonal? You would never see a police officer like this in regular Star Trek. I thought the planet was a utopia. Why is this action scene in the film to begin with? Is it to show how reckless Kirk was as a youth? Maybe how he was a rebel? Sure, but primarily in the film, this scene is there to give a general audience a relatable action scene they could see in any stock standard blockbuster. A car chase. Young Kirk almost falls off a cliff. They keep doing this, just like they keep blowing up planets. That's another thing. Why? Because these things are done to titillate and excite, to generate cheap thrills over story. The story serves the action rather than the action being a product of the story. You see, the writers are unable to write a deep and emotionally compelling story that resonates, so they instead give you big explosions and a constant barrage of breathless action scenes to hide the fact that there's no substance to the film and no sense to the story. I have to say the cast, however, are excellent, really doing very well with the roles that they're given, but their portrayal of the Enterprise crew is quite different to the original versions. Chris Pine is very good as a leading man, but as the captain of a starship, this version of Kirk is too antagonistic, immature, and emotionally unstable. We meet him first in a bar, and he's drunk, totally unsuave, trying to chat up Uhura and failing miserably. Not something that would happen to the original Kirk. It's not long before he's in a fist fight with 4 other guys, and Captain Pike intervenes, and he's played with real gravitas by Bruce Greenwood, and I have to say he's another one of the film's few highlights. He encourages Kirk to enlist in Starfleet and follow in his father's footsteps. Kirk eventually agrees. By the way, the Enterprise is being constructed on Earth. What? Why? It makes much more sense to build a massive starship in space. Well, I'll tell you why this was done, and it's fairly obvious. So we could get this cool scene where Kirk gets to ride on his motorbike, and he then looks up at the Enterprise being built in the distance. It's done purely for this shot, which is to say, it was done for style over substance reasons. It is impractical to build a starship, even partially, on a planet's surface. It has been established in Star Trek that starships are built in space. Now, that's not something that Kirk would be able to see from his motorbike, obviously. But forget about logic, reason, practicality. What takes precedence in this film is having this really cool shot of Captain Kirk looking up longingly at a partially constructed USS Enterprise. Now, I do very much like the introduction of Dr. McCoy, and Carl Urban delivers a really great performance. And I also like how Bones got his name. It's a very clever line. But we're supposed to believe that these Academy cadets, with no experience serving on starships in space, and have just 3 years of Academy education behind them, are in any way qualified or suited to the roles of senior officers on the flagship of the Federation. That's what happens. Kirk, who isn't even an ensign, is promoted to first officer and then later captain of the Enterprise during this film, despite being a stowaway. Pike is taken prisoner by Nero. Spock is briefly in charge. We witness the destruction of his home planet and the death of his mother. And this is where, once again, there's a failing to understand the character of Spock. Kirk has to take command at one point, and the only way to do that is to demonstrate that Spock is emotionally compromised. And he does this by taunting him about the death of his mother and how he doesn't feel anything and therefore he must never have loved her, to which Spock responds by going postal. Now sure, it's very possible an emotionally compromised Spock would react emotionally given the death of his mother and the destruction of his homeworld, but to turn psycho and almost kill Kirk on the bridge and everyone just watching, it's a bit much. The idea that the crew would then just fall in line and follow Kirk as captain, who had just abused and mocked Spock in this cruel manner, in order to encourage Spock to stand down by being emotionally compromised, it was just also unbelievable. Kirk may have been named first officer under Spock by Captain Pike, and technically he would be promoted to captain in Spock's absence or withdrawal from the role, but it's unlikely a crew of qualified ensigns and lieutenants would follow Kirk as captain in such an event. It is more likely that a ranking ensign or lieutenant with command training would have assumed command of the Enterprise when Spock stood down. As for Spock's violent emotional outburst, this would of course become a pattern with him, also going postal on Khan after Kirk was killed in Star Trek Into Darkness. A more appropriate reaction to Kirk's taunts would have been perhaps a Vulcan nerve pinch, or grabbing him by the scruff of the collar, pushing him away, even one punch to the face. I mean, these are more believable reactions, not a violent rampage and trying to choke Kirk out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I do like the sequence in the film where Kirk meets older Spock. Leonard Nimoy adds much weight and presence to the film that satisfies most fans of the Star Trek that was. And we also get the introduction of Montgomery Scott, played I think very well by Simon Pegg. But again, we get another arbitrary action scene where Kirk and Scotty are transwarp beamed aboard the Enterprise, and there's this water turbine control room. So why is there a sequence where Scotty is beamed into water pipes and Kirk has to rescue him? Well, again, it's simply an excuse to keep up the pacing of the film to such a degree that the audience never has a moment to stop and think about the paper-thin plot and obvious logical inconsistencies. A tactic used even more in Into Darkness, where the action never lets up for a moment. Again, relentless explosions, fights, spaceship battles, action set pieces, and pew pew pew. It's a great way to distract the audience from the lack of a coherent story. Action and CG being used as a replacement for a quality plot and character development. Placing Spock and Uhura together in an unexpected romantic relationship may seem like a clever way to subvert fan expectations, but it just doesn't make any sense or even remotely work in these films. It just makes me wince. Now, as for the production design and visual style of the film, I really do not like the cinematography and shot composition in this movie. The camera is just flying all over the place. You never get a proper, aesthetically pleasing beauty shot of any of the ships. The camera is often too close to the ships. There's lots of other things in the way. There's way too much lens flare throughout the film. There's too much shakiness. Even when shooting on the sets, there's an overuse of Dutch angles, too many close-ups. You can't get a full sense of the rooms that the characters are in and the space around them. The bridge looks like a mess with way too many consoles and officers and stations, but at least let me see the whole room, please. Give me some proper establishing shots. Give me some wide shots of the bridge. Stop moving and shaking the camera and obstructing the frame with constant distracting lens flares, and stop framing so many shots from awkward, jarring angles. It can be hard to tell the distance between the characters. It's hard to keep track of where everyone is relative to each other sometimes. Furthermore, whose idea was it to make engineering look like a kind of water treatment facility or some kind of factory? Apparently this was filmed in the Budweiser brewing factory in California, and it's the weirdest decision. It looks so out of place and inconsistent with the rest of the Enterprise sets. Look at the Kelvin engineering room. Right? There's these water handle gate valves like you'd see on a boiler. Are starships in this universe steam powered or something? What possible use could that have on a starship in the 23rd century? So in the end of the movie, Pew 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 saves the day from Nero and the Narada. Earth is saved from the drill, and the Narada is going to fall into a black hole and be destroyed. Now, there's a moment where Kirk offers to render assistance, and Spock is completely out of character, and he asks Kirk why he's doing this, and Kirk says he's showing compassion, and this could be a way to win peace with Romulus in the future. And he says to Spock that he thought that he would like this, to which Spock replies, no, not really, not this time. And it's kind of supposed to be humorous, but again, it's not something that Spock would ever say. And then Nero replies with, I would rather suffer the end of Romulus 1,000 times. I would rather die in agony than accept assistance from you. To which Kirk replies, you got it. Okay, so after Nero refuses Kirk's assistance, Kirk then orders to arm phasers and fire everything they've got. Does that make any sense to you? Did you catch that? So the Narada is being ripped apart in this black hole, and it's about to be destroyed. And Kirk offers assistance, and Nero declines, which he's entitled to. And then Kirk says, okay, we'll fire at you then. Why? What the hell? Why would he fire at him? Why not just let his compromised ship fall into the singularity? Huh? Nero and his ship are going to be destroyed anyway. What's the point of firing at him? So, Star Trek 2009 is a very stupid film, much like Into Darkness, which was even worse, and the stupidity is buried under a mountain of mostly arbitrary action scenes, lots of running around in corridors, cheap humor, fights, CGI explosions, and super fast pacing. And if you take away all of those superficial things, you're left with an incredibly weak story, the dumbest villain I've ever seen on film, and a film that only bears a superficial resemblance to Star Trek in name only. Those are my thoughts on Star Trek 2009. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you soon. The Dave Cullen Show is made possible by you, my generous subscribers. If you'd like to support my work, head on over to my Subscribe star, linked below in the description box, and for a pledge of as little as $1 per month, you can help to keep the show going. I'm also doing one-to-one monthly subscriber chats. Thanks again. Take care.